was standing outside a venue I had personally paid $32,000 for. The flowers, the catering, the string quartet, even the gold chargers under every plate. When my brother's bride looked me dead in the eye, in front of 2 bridesmaids and my own mother, and said, "You don't belong here." She didn't lower her voice. She said it loud enough that a waiter carrying a tray of champagne actually stopped walking. And my brother, standing 6 feet away in the tuxedo I had also paid for, said absolutely nothing. He looked at his shoes. He let it happen. They expected me to cry, maybe cause a scene. Instead, I turned around, walked to my car across the gravel, sat down behind the wheel, and opened my phone. Within 11 minutes, I had canceled every vendor contract with my name on it. Because here's something I learned that day. After 39 years of being the reasonable one in my family, you don't tell the person who paid for your wedding that she doesn't belong at it and expect the day to go on as planned. Welcome back to Hidden Truth Stories. Tonight's story is about the quiet, invisible people families count on. And what happens the one time that person finally stops being quiet? If this hits close to home, drop a comment. And before we go further, where are you watching from tonight? Type your city below. I read every single one. My name is Vanessa Hale. I'm 39. I run a small tax and bookkeeping firm outside Denver. And if you asked my family to describe me in one word, they'd say responsible, not favorite. There's a canyon of difference, and I spent most of my life standing at the bottom of it. My younger brother, Nathan, was the center of gravity in our house. He wasn't especially driven, but he was charming in that effortless way, and it excused almost everything. When he forgot to walk the dog or brought home a failing report card, my mother laughed it off. "He's just a boy, Vanessa. You were never like that." I wasn't, because I was never allowed to be. "You're older, you should know better," was my mother's favorite sentence, and I heard it constantly, whether Nathan broke something of mine or took credit for something I'd built. By the time we reached high school, the gap in how we were treated had become impossible to ignore. I graduated valedictorian and got into a state university on full scholarship. My parents missed the ceremony entirely. My father had a work conflict. My mother had a headache. Nathan had a baseball game he didn't even start in. I sat in my cap and gown, watching other families swarm their graduates with flowers, told myself it didn't matter, and knew, even as I said it, that it did. It mattered enormously. After college, I built my life without asking my parents for $1. 2 jobs, a studio apartment, years of unglamorous grinding until my firm finally turned a real profit. When Nathan dropped out of community college twice, nobody blinked. When he totaled his car at 26, my parents wired him $6,000 within a week, no questions asked. I never asked why I'd never once been offered that kind of safety net. I already knew the answer. You're the one we don't have to worry about. That sentence followed me into every relationship, too. A man I dated for 3 years told me, on his way out the door, "You're great, Vanessa, just not exciting." It landed hard, because for my whole life, I'd been taught that being stable and generous wasn't something worth celebrating. It was expected. An expectation doesn't make you lovable. It makes you invisible. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor with a glass of wine that night, wondering when exactly I had become someone people relied on, but never chose. Still, I kept showing up. I called my mother every week, remembered every birthday, cheered Nathan through 3 different sales jobs, and rewrote his resume twice, without being asked. I told myself this was simply what older sisters did, that maybe if I kept showing up long enough, someone would finally notice. When Nathan met Brianna, I genuinely tried to make a good impression, to like her, to be the kind of sister-in-law worth having around. She worked in event coordination, always polished, always half glued to her phone. The first time we met, she gave me one long, appraising look that reminded me of people who see you as useful rather than worth knowing. I brushed it off as nerves, told myself weddings make everyone a little strange. When they got engaged, my first instinct wasn't hesitation. It was, how can I help? When they hesitated over the budget, I said the words that would haunt me for months. Let me handle it. Consider it my gift. They were stunned. Nathan hugged me so hard, he lifted me off the ground. My mother said, "Vanessa, that's so generous of you." In a tone that suggested genuine surprise, I had it in me. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd finally stepped inside the circle I'd spent my whole life orbiting. I should have remembered. In my family, generosity was never reciprocated. It was expected. I was about to find out exactly how expected. If you've ever been the reliable one who quietly footed the bill for someone else's happiness, tell me in the comments. What did your family call you instead of the favorite? I signed every contract personally, paid every deposit from my own account, and made sure my name sat at the top of every vendor's paperwork as primary contact. My attorney helped me add one clause to each agreement. No transfers, no unauthorized changes, nothing moved without my written approval. Not because I expected betrayal, because after 39 years of being the background character in my own family, I'd learned to prepare for exactly this without fully admitting I was doing it. A week after the last contract was signed, Brianna called, her voice unusually sweet. "I'd love for you to be my maid of honor," she said. I was standing in my office break room holding a lunch I no longer wanted. Something about the phrasing felt less like an invitation and more like a thank you card handed out of obligation. But I pushed the feeling down and said yes, wanting to believe it meant something. I threw myself into the role. Spreadsheets for the rehearsal schedule, researching stylists and florists, mood boards in the sage and lilac tones Brianna had once called elegant, a professional makeup trial I paid for out of pocket when the quote came back higher than expected. Most of it got a thumbs up emoji, if it got any response at all. Twice, I discovered decisions had already been made behind my back, including an entire photography package in a completely different style than we'd discussed for weeks. "I didn't want to bother you with the little details," Brianna said when I gently brought it up. Nathan grew harder to reach with every passing week. Calls went unanswered for days. "We'll loop you in soon," he'd write. Once, dropping off fabric samples unannounced, he opened the door and hesitated a full second before letting me in. Long enough that I noticed. Inside, Brianna was laughing on a video call she muted the moment she saw me, standing up too fast. "You should have told us you were coming," she said, as if I needed permission to visit my own brother. That night, scrolling the bridesmaids group chat, I found a photo of new dresses in a completely different color than we'd agreed on. Nobody had mentioned it. I texted Nathan directly. He didn't reply until the next morning. "Yeah, Brianna changed her mind. Sorry, it happened fast." Something in that engagement, in my own family, was shifting slowly and coldly, like a door closing behind me while I was still standing in the room. I decided to be direct and asked to meet them both. We sat at a downtown coffee shop, the kind with oversized wine glasses and appetizers that looked more like art installations than food. Brianna arrived in a sharp white blazer, manicure fresh, expression pleasant and unreadable. Nathan looked exhausted, fidgeting with the lid of his cup, glancing at Brianna more than he looked at me. I took a breath. "I just want to know if everything's okay," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I feel like I'm stepping on toes lately. Decisions are happening without me." Brianna's smile stayed perfectly polite and perfectly empty. "Vanessa, we appreciate everything you've done, truly. Planning is just stressful. Try not to take it personally. I'm not upset, I said. Just confused. I thought we were doing this together. It's nothing, Vanessa, Nathan said. You've already done more than enough. Don't stress about it. That should have reassured me. It didn't. I drove home with my chest tight, telling myself one more time that I was probably overthinking it. A week later, cleaning up after dinner, scrolling my phone with the TV murmuring in the background, I saw it. Brianna had posted a new photo. Bright, filtered, her arm around a woman I vaguely recognized from a fitting, both holding champagne under string lights. The caption read, "My maid of honor. Couldn't imagine this day without you." My hands went still on the screen. I read it again, then a third time, thinking I must be misunderstanding something. But there was nothing to misunderstand. It wasn't me. No call, no message, no conversation. Just quietly, publicly replaced, as though I'd never been part of it at all. I called Nathan immediately. Brianna felt like she needed someone closer for that role, he said. A best friend thing, not a family thing. I was the maid of honor, I said slowly. I've handled the planning, the payments, the timelines, for months. I know, and we really do appreciate that, he said, the way you'd thank someone for holding a door. But you're still invited. You'll have a seat. A seat, I repeated. You know what I mean, he said. You're still family. That word hit me like an insult, dressed up as reassurance. I hung up. He didn't call back. Second question for you. If you started noticing decisions being made behind your back on something you were personally funding, would you have confronted it sooner than I did, or given them the benefit of the doubt too, the way I kept doing? The next morning, I drove to see my mother, hoping, foolishly, for support. She didn't even look up from her magazine. Vanessa, don't make this about you, she said. It's Brianna's day. You've always been so sensitive about things that don't concern you. Sitting in her living room, I felt with total clarity the entire shape of my life up to that point. Every quiet forfeit. Every, you're older, you should know better. Every time my needs had been treated as an inconvenience to someone else's story. Something in me that had been patient for 39 years simply stopped being patient. I didn't scream. I thanked her for her time, drove straight to my office, opened every vendor contract with my own name and my own money on it, and read through the clause my attorney had built into each one. Then, calmly, over 11 minutes, I began canceling. The caterer, the florist, the quartet, the photographer, the venue deposit, still within its refund window by exactly 4 days. I didn't do it out of blind rage. I did it because I finally understood something I should have understood years earlier. Paying for something doesn't buy you love, but it does buy you the right to walk away from people who treat your generosity as an entitlement instead of a gift. I didn't tell anyone. I went to the wedding anyway, because I'd already RSVP'd, and because some old habit in me still wanted to see it through with dignity intact. I dressed modestly, brought a gift I never ended up giving, and arrived exactly on time. That's when Brianna crossed the lawn and said, loud enough for a passing waiter to hear, "You don't belong here." Nathan, 6 feet away, said nothing. He looked at his shoes. I understood, in that single moment, that I had spent my entire life waiting for my family to defend me. And it had simply never once occurred to any of them that they should. I walked to my car without a word and drove home. The first call came 4 hours later. The venue coordinator, panicked, asking why the final payment hadn't cleared. I explained politely that the account had been closed that morning, per the cancellation clause. Similar calls followed from the florist, the photographer, the quartet. By the time cocktail hour was supposed to begin, there was no food, no flowers, no music, and a venue reserved by a payment that no longer existed. Nathan called 11 times that evening. I let it ring. His texts arrived in waves. Confused, then furious, then, by midnight, something close to desperate. I sat with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel guilty. I felt calm. My mother called 3 days later, her voice tight. "Do you understand what you've done?" They had to push the reception. Half the guests went home hungry. I let her finish, then said something I'd never once said to her in 39 years. I understand exactly what I did. What I don't understand is why it took a canceled catering order for anyone in this family to notice I existed. She had no answer for that. Nathan and I didn't speak for almost 2 months. When he finally called, it wasn't really an apology, more an attempt to understand what had happened. I told him the truth plainly. I hadn't paid for his wedding to buy a seat at the table. I'd paid for it because I loved him, and hoped, foolishly, that love might finally be reciprocated instead of assumed. The day his bride told me I didn't belong at an event I had personally funded, and he said nothing, was the day I finally understood the difference between being needed and being valued. He and Brianna did eventually marry, a much smaller ceremony 6 months later that I wasn't invited to and didn't ask to attend. So tell me honestly, in the comments, was I wrong to walk away and pull the funding? Or did they finally get exactly the day they'd earned? Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I still run my firm. I still call my mother, though less often now, and on my own terms. And every so often, when a client thanks me for something small, I think about that gravel parking lot and the 11 minutes it took to finally, for once in my life, choose myself first.